And welcome back, Mindsetters. Hope you had a nice little break. You went and basically did whatever you had to do to make sure that you're back ready and paying attention. I hope you guys got yourself something warm to drink because it is freezing. As you noticed, it was snowing the other day. I'm not a fan of the cold. But anyway, besides that, I hope you guys are ready. You've got your pens and pads out and you're ready to make notes and you're going to get posting on the page. So this is the part where I now hand over to Ilse, who's going to continue the rest of the show.
Thank you, Ty. Right, guys, we had a little introduction now to the flowers and to the pine tree. So let's now go into a bit more detail. Right, as we said now, plant diversity, gymnosperms, angiosperms, and we need a pen. Right, those two groups belong to spermatophytes. Okay. Spermatophytes, the word phytes mean plants. The word sperma comes from the word seeds. So these are seed-bearing plants. All right, so both groups produce seeds. Then let's go on to the gymnospermae. We are commonly known as the conifers, okay, because their seeds, as we said, they're seed-producing plants, are produced in cones. There are male and female cones, as I've explained to you. Right. Oopsie, I'm now moving this thing around. Apologize. Okay, has thick waxy cuticle, and we said that is a feature for being able to survive in very harsh conditions, so they adapted for terrestrial or land life. They have a complex vascular system, which means, remember, that they have xylem and phloem, which we did not have in the moss plant. So if you can remember, the moss plant was not adapted for land because it didn't have proper xylem and phloem tissue. Okay. Right, they have true root stems and leaves, meaning that this plant is also adapted, as I said, for that terrestrial life. Right. This thing is playing up with me, yeah. Okay. Now we're going to get to the life cycle. Now, we have to apply, if you can remember, we did the alternation of generations, and you need to apply that alternation of generations to the moss, to the fern, and also now to the gymno and the angiosperm. So let's see if you can remember anything about the alternation of generations. Let's start with the sporophyte generation. All right, there's the pine tree now, which is represented now, or representing now the sporophyte generation. The sporophyte generation is our 2N, or diploid generation. Meaning that sporophyte, yes, it's also going to produce spores. Okay, now on this little tree branch here, we can see there's a cone. Now it says ovulate, cone, and that refers to the female. That refers to a female cone, and then the pollen cone is the male cone. Okay, so we have female cones, male cones on the same tree. Now, if we go to a bit of detail, if we have to make a longitudinal section, okay, longitudinal sections through a female cone, we're going to notice little round things inside. And those little round things are referred to as megasporangia. Now, I'm doing a very brief summary. You don't need to know all the detail about what happens inside these little megasporangiums, exactly how the egg cells are formed and produced. That detail you're going to do mainly in grade 12 next year. So we're doing very, very briefly the alternation of generations in the pine tree. Okay, so that structure there now, that whole structure, we're now going to call that the ovule. Now that's something different that we didn't have in the moss and the fern. It's called an ovule. Now after fertilization, that ovule is going to develop into the seed. So I'm mentioning it now already so that you can keep that in mind. Right, now what process takes place in the sporophyte generation? Can you remember? The process of meiosis. Why does meiosis have to take place? Can you remember that? Meiosis needs to take place to make the gametophyte generation. So we're going to have meiosis taking place inside the ovule, and that's going to produce later on the egg cell. Just extend that a little bit more. All right, so meiosis is going to produce inside, going to have the female part, the archegonia, is very reduced now. Remember I said to you the gametophyte generation is very, very reduced in this group of plants. So the sporophyte generation is the dominant generation, and then the gametophyte is reduced. As we can see, the archegonia is reduced there, very small, and inside that we're going to have the egg cells. Okay, let's go back to the male cone. Let's take another color for the male cone. Or maybe not that color. Okay, there's the male cones. Now, they only appear on the tree this time of the year, as I said. That's one male cone. They appear as little clusters, or a little cluster with about 50 little male cones in one cluster. Right, the process of meiosis once again takes place inside these male cones. All right, and these now are all the little pollen grains that I showed you. Those yellow little dots are all the pollen grains. So what's going to happen, they will be now transferred by wind. Okay, now something you have to remember again from the moss and the fern. What did the moss and the fern depend on for fertilization, for the sperm cell to reach the egg cell? Was water. Now these plants are not dependent on water for fertilization. They depend mainly on wind for the pollen to get to the female cone. Now, how does the actual little sperm cell get to the female cell? Is by a pollen. Let's just move this up a little bit. All right. So what's going to happen? Yeah. As you can see now, there's a pollen. The pollen gets into there. It shows the pollen grains are going to land now on this. All right. It's going to land there. And these little pollen grains are actually going to grow inside the little egg by using a pollen tube. So instead of water taking the pollen to the female or the male cell to the female cell, there is going to be a little pollen tube that grows into the ovule, taking the male cell into the female cell. And now we're going to have fertilization. What is fertilization? It's N plus N makes 2N. So it's an egg fused with the little sperm cell, and that is going to make now a zygote. All right, so fertilization. We're first going to have a zygote, and then that zygote will develop into the embryo. There you can see it right inside of the little embryo. Okay. That is the ovule, which will develop into a seed. That's where the seed plants come in now. So gymnospermae means seed plants. And where are the seeds? The seeds are now inside the female cone. If we can just go back to that diagram, the longitudinal section of the female cone, there are the ovules. So inside those ovules, that's where fertilization has taken place. And each of those little ovules now is going to produce a seed. So what's going to happen now? That cone, round about the third year, so about 3 years, that's 2 to 3 years. That's how long it takes for the female cone to produce its eggs, for fertilization to take place, and for the seeds to be formed. Then this whole male-female cone will open up, and the little seeds have got these wings. All right, so there's little wings, and what's going to happen? They're going to open up, and the seeds will now be dispersed also by wind. These seeds will land on suitable soil, and it will develop into a seedling. All right, and these seedlings have got little cotyledons, which are really the first little leaves, as you can see there. And what's going to happen now, those little leaves can actually photosynthesize, and the whole plant now will grow into the new sporophyte generation, a new plant. Now, what they love to ask for you to draw a line to show where does the sporophyte and the gametophyte, how are they separated? So where are we going? We're going to look for two words. We're going to look for the word meiosis, all right, because that is where 2n now becomes n. So the sporophyte generation changes into the haploid generation, which is the gametophyte generation, and we're going to look for the word fertilization. So those are your two words that you're going to look for if you have to draw a line to separate the sporophyte from the gametophyte generation. That's a hint. That's a big hint. Okay, so what you're going to do, take your ruler, and you can now decide how to draw your line. You can draw it straight through like that. All right? And you can say this side is the 2n generation, which is sporophyte generation, and that side is the gametophyte generation. Are you happy with that? Can you remember all of these words that I've mentioned in the previous lessons? I hope so. Let's move on to... Okay, this thing is not the right way. Ty?
Is she misbehaving?
Yeah, this board is definitely misbehaving today.
Are you going to be okay there? Or do you think
I think it's because it's cold.
Yes, it's
I
just...
think it's cold.
Yeah.
Right, I think...
Are you okay there?
Yes, I'm super.
All right,
Thank you. The gymnosperms, there's a range of plants. We said conifers because they form cones. Here's a beautiful picture of, as you can recognize it maybe as a cycad. So there is the cone right in the middle. So cycads belong to this group of gymnosperms. All right, I think before we now going to move on to the angiosperms, Ty, we can maybe then have a tie break. But like I always say, let's have a quick ad break.
All right, no problem. On that note, mindsetters, as I always stress, do not disappear now. Fair enough, go do whatever you have to do. Go answer the phone, go talk to mom, go talk to whoever. But make sure you come back after this break. We'll see you soon. Cheers.